Hey everyone, the fly I'm going to be tying for you today is the Walt's worm. There are a multitude of videos on how to tie this fly out there, but what I really want to focus on is beginning fly tiers and why this fly is so important to learn how to tie the perfect way, because if you learn to tie this fly the perfect way, it's going to translate into other types of flies, which I'll talk about later. But one thing, if you're starting a nymphing box, you can't go wrong with the Walt's just simply because it's such a great fish catcher. I mean, it represents caddises, sowbugs, mayflies. You can tie them in a multitude of colors and sizes. Just a great bug. And honestly, if I only had one bug to fish, it would be the Walt's worm just because it's so versatile. But I'm going to put a hook in the vise here, and I'm going to show you how I tie 90% of my Walt's. And I really want to focus on how we dub the fly. And once again, if you learn how to tie this the perfect way, which I think you can right away, it's just going to translate into other flies, other soft hackles, other dubbed body flies, even dry flies. So let's put a hook in the vise, and I'm going to walk you through the steps. So the hook I have in the vise, it's a Hanak 470. This is a size 14. The hook doesn't matter. I believe in quality hooks, so use whatever your favorite hook is. And this is a copper 3.3 millimeter bead. I like to use dark thread for my Walt's. This is an olive dun. This is a Uni 80. And let's talk about thread a minute. If you are a beginning fly tier and you're tying nymphs, you are going to be better served using really thin, narrow threads. Uni 80s, Danville 60s, UTC 70s, Vivus 16.0 or 14.0. These threads are very thin in diameter, and when you use thin diameter thread, you keep down the bulk. And I'm going to constantly talk about keeping down the bulk of a fly, because nymphs under the water, for the most part, 90% of them are very small and slender, and we need to keep our flies that way. So what we want to do is, let's start, just put the thread behind the bead. Now, we're just going to stop it right behind the bead. You don't need to run it down the hook shank. And you're going to see a lot of videos that talk about seating that bead. I'm not a fan of that. You don't need to do that. We can seat the bead at the end of the fly. The reason you don't want to do it at the beginning is because you're going to add a lot of thread wraps and unnecessary bulk. We can always do it at the end. When I see a poorly tied fly, I know pretty much what the problem is. It's too much of something on it. It's too much thread. It's too much dubbing, too much feathers, too much hackle. And the great thing about tying flies is you are in control. You can control everything. You control the thread wraps. You control the amount of dubbing that goes on the thread. So we need to do that. Every time we wrap something around that hook shank, it has to have purpose. So just don't blindly just start wrapping thread. I see that a lot. People just kind of throw a bunch of wraps when 5 wraps will do. Instead, they're putting literally 30 on. So let's keep the thread wraps to the minimum. There's just no reason to do that. It just doesn't make the fly any more durable. So just start the thread behind the bead. Now, the way I like to tie my Walt is I rib it with the thread. Very simple to do, and it's extremely durable, and it has a really nice ribbing effect. So what I do is I double the thread over, and then you can see I'm just slowly wrapping the thread down the hook shank. And I'll wrap it to where it almost starts curving right there. I'll put that double thread in my material clip. I think it's really important as a fly tier to have a material clip to keep things out of the way. You can see I took my hands off the bobbin and I turned the hook that way. The reason you want to do that is that hook point is extremely sharp. The moment that thread nicks that point, it's either going to fray it or it's going to break it. So always get in the habit of turning that hook away when you take your hands off the bobbin. I think the next thing, the most important thing about flies is controlling the amount of materials we put on. But I think what's also important is understanding the materials we're dealing with. So in the case of dubbing, you have fine dubbings and you have coarse dubbing. So the original hare's ear was made with a brand called Hairline. It's extremely coarse. It's still in production today. I personally don't like it. I just think it's too coarse. But if you're dealing with coarse dubbing, and ice dub is a coarse dubbing, you need to make sure you're thinning that out because the noodle we're putting on the thread has to be uniform. We don't want any bumps or lumps. If you have a bump or a lump, you need to thin that out. So the dubbing that I like, the hare's ear that I like is from Troutline. It's called Mad Rabbit dubbing. I think Jack Mikovits also makes a great dubbing. And as a fly tyer, especially a beginning fly tyer, you're going to be better served getting hare's ear or dubbings that are very fine. So take some dubbing out of the pack. And I saw Kelly Gallup recently talk about the amount of dubbing people, because he talks, I agree with him. He says that usually a poorly tied fly is too much dubbing. So a good way to know if you've taken too much dubbing out is that, first of all, when you look on the camera, everything seems much larger. So I'm going to talk about the sizes here in a minute, but that's about the size of a fingernail. And you can see it's not very translucent. So if you drop it, you can see it just drops straight down. What Kelly Gallup says is, and I really like his example, is you just pull it off and you can see it's not a lot there. And watch when I drop it, you see it actually just fluttered away. Like it just kind of floats away. When it's doing that, you know you have the right amount of dubbing. So I take it, I'll thin it out. Just go very thin. You are better to thin it out and have it longer than shorter and thicker. Because if it's long and thin, you can actually, it's like thread. You're just wrapping it up the hook shank. So you can put one on top of the other and it's not going to really add a lot of bulk. But just really focus on thinning it out and really focus on having a tight noodle with no lumps. And you can see that looks pretty darn good right there. And that is about, and this is where people, you watch YouTube videos and they look like they're 3 inches long. That right there is about 1.5 inches of dubbing. I'm going to try to slide it up. And when I slide it, I'm going to make sure there are no lumps. And you can see that looks really nice. It's about maybe twice the diameter of the thread. It's very thin and very uniform. And any beginner can do what I did right there. It doesn't take an advanced fly tyer to simply thin that out and make a really nice noodle. That is the most important thing you can do with a Walt's worm or any type of dubbed fly. Now, we're just going to wrap it up the hook shank, one right in front of the other. And you're going to build a slight taper, so some of them go right on top of the other, but you can see how I'm just in control. I'm taking my time. Now, you're having that nice taper. I need a little more dubbing because we're going to take it up to right behind the bead. So I'm just pulling off a little more. I'm going to take my time. You can always put some on and you can always take some off too. Just because it's on, it doesn't mean you got to use it all. So let's make sure that we're building that nice, thin, tight noodle. Right there. It's about 3/4 of an inch. And then we're just going to continue to build that really nice taper to right behind the bead. Put it on our bobbin cradle. Now, I take a dubbing loop tool, and we're going to take that loop and we're going to spin it. And doubling that thread makes it extremely durable. And you can really put some pressure on. And now we're just going to rib it up. That's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times to the back of the bead. And it really digs into that hare's ear, and it gives a really nice ribbed effect, and it really makes that fly durable. It's really hard for the trout's teeth to get in there and have it nicked and fall apart. But so I really like doubling that thread over. So I wrap 4 times around, 1 in front of the bead, behind it, and then we're just going to go ahead and cut that thread off. Now, you can see there's still a little gap, and you see, by the way, you can see this bead is seated now. We did it at the end, so make sure, I'm telling you that's an extremely important step, seat it at the end. But you can see there's that little gap right there, so we just want to fill in a little bit more hare's ear, so just take a little more. We're going to thin it out. Always just take your time. And as you get better, you're just going to pick up speed and you're not even going to notice it. But I'm all about taking your time, slowing it down. Just even a Walt's worm can be a good looking fly. Now, I think I put too much on. So let's take that off. It's best to pick it off. I'll back it off and then I'll tighten it on. And the way I like to finish my flies is you will see a lot of people doing a lot of whip finishes. I don't like doing that because when you start putting too many whip finishes, I'll see people do 2 sets of 4. The reason I don't like doing that is because the thread starts building up and then it starts cutting back into the fly. And sometimes it overwhelms the fly and I just don't think it looks nice. So I finish every one of my nymphs off this way. I take a little super glue. I'll just hit the thread. I'll go 1, 2. Take my whip finisher. 1, 2. And what happens is the thread kind of tucks in right behind the bead and you have this really clean looking fly and you don't even see the thread. The only time I want the thread showing is when I'm purposely building a fluorescent orange hotspot or something like that. Now with all my Walt's worms, I will actually give them a haircut. I don't like them. I like them very slim and I'll let the fish pick them out. A few guard hairs sticking out. Probably looks much larger on the camera, but there you go. There is a fish catcher right there. That is the Walt's worm right there. That's how I tie 90% of my Walt's worms. You can't go wrong with filling a box of Walt's worms. And if you really concentrate on that noodle, keeping it thin and uniform, and just really taking your time, you're going to perfect the Walt's worm right away, and it will translate into other well-tied flies. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it helped you out. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. If you like this video, I'd appreciate it if you give me a thumbs up. And if you like what I'm doing, I would appreciate it if you would subscribe. And as always, tight lines, everybody. I'll talk to you later.